Welcome to Data is a Team Sport. This is School of Data's series of online conversations, videos, and podcasts where we are exploring the ever-evolving data literacy ecosystem. Other episodes explore different elements of the data literacy ecosystem, such as the learner experience, data-driven journalism, advocacy organizations, academia, and government. And you can find them all at schoolofdata.org. This is a special podcast episode featuring an in-depth one-on-one interview with Heather Leson from the International Federation of the Red Cross. And what we're exploring today is, what does it take for a big institution to become data literate? I'm your host, I'm Dirk Slater. I have an agency called Fab Writers, and along with being an active member of the School of Data community, I also provide workshops, skills building, and consultation for advocates and activists on how to build inclusive data projects to make their campaigns more effective. With me today, as I said, is Heather Leson. She is a longtime member of the School of Data community, who is currently data literacy lead at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Heather also has an excellent blog called Text on Text, where she reflects on her learnings. So hello, Heather.
Hi, Dirk. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, yay. One more day till the weekend. So curious in terms of, I mean, you have quite a wide range of experience, but and also it's also actually good just in terms of context. How long have you been with the International Federation of the Red Cross now?
So I joined the Red Crescent last fall, so September 26th, technically, and started out right after State of the Map, which is a big mapping community event. So that was great. So about 10 months now.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, and the big thing I want to get out is what have been your big lessons learned so far in trying to get a big institution like the International Federation of the Red Cross to become more data literate?
Right. So IFRC, the Federation, is part of the movement. So we work with the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Federation. The Federation works specifically with 190 national societies. We have a secretariat, which I'm working inside of. Inside the secretariat, there's 3,000 employees around the world. And we have 5 regional offices. We have, the national societies alone have 500,000 staff. There's 13 million volunteers. It's a real wide remit. And so when you ask what lessons am I doing and how am I working in the IFRC, well, it's varied. It depends on what portion of the IFRC you're talking about. So my primary focus is really on the secretariat and trying to help the secretariat by creating materials that could be used for national societies. And so my first kind of key lessons are applying some of the stuff I learned at Ushahidi and School of Data, thinking about how do we build a kind of global and local community within house. So I found internal ambassadors, and the first kind of big highlight was, asking everybody. Don't just ask your usual suspects around data literacy. I think there's some mad data literacy skills in the finance department and HR skills in HR. And so we set up an informal data working group, and we had them tell us what the curriculum should be. And we sent it to everybody in the whole staff. So by involving people as equals, we were able to build a little bit more organizational confidence and demystify it, as data is not about IT or not about just the technology, it's about the people. And every single skill share that we've done, whether it be a hands-on learning or kind of theoretical or making things, all kind of an interactive activity, has really focused on internal talent. I believe that everyone has a gift to give. And I think that we've been really fortunate in the fact that we just don't have the need right yet with data literacy to focus on external parties. We focus on what our talent has in-house. So those ambassadors have become our trainers. Those ambassadors have also become, more importantly, the people who kind of socialize it in-house. And that when you're talking about data literacy in a large institution, it's a long game. There's no like one-off. It's not one workshop. You really need to have deep tissue roots. So find your internal ambassadors. Think about what your skill share. Have them drive that curriculum. Be ready to pivot and we have quite a bit. We've used every opportunity for outside guests and people from the national societies who come and visit to have them kind of Skillshare as well. The session plans that we've driven and built have been documented, shared in the different regional offices. So people are taking the examples that we've created of what an 1 hour kind of conversation would look like, and then remixing it for their own region. And so that's been kind of a really good piece around it. So there's a lot of different nuances, but it's really about trying to build the confidence that you've got this. There's a lot of data skills in-house. Rather than focusing on the barriers, focus on the opportunities of the talent in-house. And that'll start the kind of trust building you need to do to get to kind of the harder data literacy activities.
And so really interesting in that explanation that you've just given, a theme that seems to be emerging in terms of people that have been focusing on getting organizations, institutions, and even other people more data literate. There is, I think, we had an assumption a few years ago that we needed to focus on tools. But one of the things that we have really started to learn is that the focus needs to be on people and not on tools.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I just love about what you've just said is that you never once mentioned tools at all. And it is really about building up things like community and getting people to sort of like tell you what it is that they need, and going at it that way. So curious in terms of the both in terms of the building of community and all that. How is that happening, and what are you getting to focus on there?
So there's so many talented, bright people across this wide, big organization, and there's some people who have different kind of community development skills. We work on national society development, we work on individual skills, we work on youth engagement. So there's people who have mad skills around it. So community builders come in all different kinds of flavors and techniques. And so while some of my background's really been in online community building, some of the local tactics that we used, especially when I was at Ushahidi, around kind of convening unlike suspects to have conversations around what they can learn from each other. This is something that we're doing in-house. And I think the community building tactics of offline to online has been fun. And, again, there's some talented folks who have long Red Cross, Red Crescent history, who know what work in the institution, who understand how people learn. And so the community building activities that we've done have been really around co-creation of materials, thinking through and building on existing learning. So there are some online courses that we have that we've already created, but I've been bringing in, and my colleague Marguerite has just been a superstar in terms of online curriculum and webinars. And so I've been bringing in another kind of tactic around how do we kind of make the conversation as we go. So while we're focused on the internal folks, it's also about, we try and share as much as we can publicly. And so we have a data blog. I'm trying to get more people to guest blog on that. We have activities where, again, those session plans are getting used. And so I'm just going to give you a very quick example. Again, we have a kind of our little kind of ragtag team of folks. We have a kind of policy of trying not to have too many PowerPoints and try and get rid of the laptop, which is radical because most people, when they think about data literacy, like, okay, let's play with our toys, as you said. We did a session on data visualization, which my colleague
No.
critical thinking and the attributes. We drew everything down. We drew diagrams. The results of that, and then kind of went through and understood what and kind of critiqued each other's data visualizations and tried to get through it. There's been kind of two big impacts of this one session, and it really kind of illustrates community building for me. One, the monitoring and evaluation team did a redraft of their annual report and decided to issue it out as an infographic rather than a 50-page document. Yes, of course, they have to report to their funders and their donors and to each other different kinds of reports, but they decided to do their year-end summary in an infographic based on that workshop and just use the workshop as a way to kind of user test it. That's one. Two, the session design has been done in 4 countries, and we're about to do it in country 5. So people have taken the session plan. They've done it in Honduras. It's been done in the Philippines. It was done in Switzerland, of course, here, and then it was also done in Madagascar, and I'm about to take it to Senegal, right? And so this concept of taking and trying out material with what you have, and then having people remix it elsewhere for their own local community. So in the Philippines, my colleague Charles added in local examples, you know, and Nikki, who did the one in Honduras, added local examples, but also tailored it for the learning styles and the culture. And I think that's the key for any kind of community building, is that there's no cookie cutter. It really is about knowing, giving people some tools and tactics, and then stepping back and letting them lead. And I think that's something that School of Data has always demonstrated, but now we need to be able to create shared curriculum. For such a large organization, that's where we're working, is the shared curriculum and remixable curriculum.
That's great. And one of the things I'm really curious about, knowing you well, Heather, is the this concept of learning. Because I think the thing that is a great opportunity with an organization like, or an institution, I should say, like IFRC, to be sort of tackling data literacy, is it's an incredible learning opportunity. But I'm betting that, you know, when they made that hire for you to come in and start working on that, I'm wondering if there was an expectation that they wanted more answers than learning, and if you've had to get over that, and also if there are good ways that you've been able to get over that. So
I think you know, there's different kinds of humanitarian activities and work that people do. I work in the Secretariat, so there's a little bit more space to spend some time thinking through the theory, but that doesn't mean that you are always mindful of what's happening in terms of operations. So there are lots of people who want just the facts, just the tools, and so I really just give me the sources so I can go and do my really hard work that I'm doing on topic X. And that's been really exciting, because I already had an understanding that you need to tailor and be ready for the people who just want to have, Heather, tell me what the best course in Tableau is, and where can I find some other kind of courses in that? Perfect, here you go. And they'll be off on their way. So just be ready for those questions, right? For that type of learner. The other learners, the ones that have been coming on, there's been some regulars who've come to our informal data working group sessions, but then there's just been a rolling place of new kinds of people coming in. Like somebody came in from fundraising a couple weeks ago, and they had completely new set of questions. And so thinking through, how do we help them on their learning journey, right? What are the kind of techniques around it? So thinking not just around, you know, what's practical and what can be used in ops versus what do people need to kind of get buy-in. I like to call it, you know, when we talk about the data pipeline, I've added in my internal documents, I've added data socialization at the front end. Right? Like that whole socialization, that piece around how do you kind of build buy-in, that's where most of my time is. And I think that they didn't anticipate that most of my time would be there, and they're okay with it. After all the sessions, and as I've started to build a network here, I've also kind of feel like I've become data help desk, right? So it's like data help desk, like you have IT help desk, you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and data help desk is really that, you know, because of my nature, and I think that's not alone, I think there's many people who have this skill, people feel safe to tell me, you know, I want to learn this, but I don't know how, and I probably should learn this. And before I do a course, can you just tell me the basics? And so that kind of basic human behavior is important. Somebody very senior, you know, came to me and said, you know what, Heather, I just don't know how to read a map. I'm like, cool, let's walk through that, right? And you know what, that's the most important thing, is that making it accessible. And really honoring the fact that, you know, this is possible, right? That each of them has a skill to bear, and that if we can kind of focus on what their change is and how we can tailor the curriculum and tailoring the plan for it, that's important. But I think the most exciting part around this kind of data help desk is that by being a person in the institution who's not a consultant, but who's in the institution there and be the first level, those things has been really critical. I'd like some help to make that possible, because I think, and when I say I'd like some help, I've talked to my other colleagues and in the other groups, and they've also found that they have questions, or they get questions. And so kind of building up what are those questions? Is there enough for us to do a session just on that topic? But when it comes to tools, and I know that I'm a bit of a long answer here, when it comes to tools, we had one session where we were showing some very shiny tools, and it was a very great output. And somebody got up and said, you know what would be really helpful to our project? Can you just focus on Excel? Can you just teach us Excel and use Excel for data literacy? So I went back to my desk and like, it was such an amazing intervention and such an important thing to say. And the reality is that, you know, we have a partnership and everybody in the national societies has access to Microsoft products, right? So that's one, everyone has access to the same thing. Two, it works offline and online, okay?
Yep.
You know, and so I wrote up a program and sent it out to people. I'm like, let's focus on, and I don't like to necessarily focus on names of products, but with everything we're doing, but we said, let's focus on this year. Let's focus on what are the components of an Excel program? What are the top 10 things that people need to know and how can we build that out? And so then it became this comment of, you know, stop showing me shiny things, show everybody how to do this, and that'll improve data quality for our indicators, our reporting, et cetera, et cetera. That became really important. And so there's a few of us who are focusing on that. So be open to being able to shift. So when organizations focus on data literacy, it's not about, it's what you have and who you have, right?
Yeah.
And if you can focus there and use that as a teaching tool, that's much better than trying to come in with today we're going to learn R. Don't get me wrong, the American Red Cross is having internal R classes for some of their information managers, and it's super important. It's peer-to-peer learning. It's happening. It's important, but that's not going to help everybody.
Right.
Right.
It is funny though, because in terms of the tools, right? I mean, I think the one thing where, you know, in terms of data literacy, I mean, we have that whole thing of like, well, you know, you really do need to understand the question, right? Like, what is the question you are trying to ask, and what is the, you know, what problems are you trying to get the data to solve? But then on the tool end, like the base layer seems to be the spreadsheet, like. It just, in terms of getting people to have that understanding of data literacy, like just getting that thing of like, here's how you use a spreadsheet, just even the basics, puts people miles ahead in terms of both, you know, being able to do the little bit of data work that they need to do, but then also in building confidence and having that deeper understanding of what is data all about and how to get there.
It's about ownership, right?
Yeah.
I created this data set. I contributed to this. I made sure that it was quality. This piece around change behavior and ownership is the biggest hurdle for data literacy, as far as I'm concerned.
And it's that piece of like building confidence for people. But I think the bit where, you know, the way that you build confidence for people is also creating an environment where it's okay for people to ask questions and to be able to say, I do not know, right? So that you can help them figure it out. And I think the thing that's really great about the examples that you've shared so far is that, you know, you've focused on that bit of like being able to answer people's questions, but also creating that space where people can come and ask you questions. And I think that's the piece, like there's no such thing as a stupid question. Yeah. You know, getting people to be able to hold that within the organization. So also just to say on one of my things, and I have another question to move us on to, but one of my mantras, you know, is if you are in an organization where it is not okay to ask the stupid question, that probably is not a healthy or good organization to be working in. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that thing of like where you're always being expected. So creating cultures and environments where people can ask questions is super important.
I think not just when people are asking questions, Dirk, I would say even more importantly, you know, there's been a lot of technology change, and there really is for the Federation, there's a digital divide. And this is just, it's about access and time and all of this. And so if we can really think through what it means to work in that environment, then we're actually having more success around data literacy. And the being able to kind of have self-serve models and being able to say, you know what, I have no clue, let's go find out together. That has been really important. And you know what, I know somebody who might know. And this call a friend thing is not just something that happens within our network. We really do lean on people who have data literacy background or training background. We ask them questions. And that's been really helpful. The network's been super important.
Well, sure. And actually, I think another important point to raise on that sort of piece is the the creation of opportunities for peer-to-peer learning, because people are going to learn much more from people that are in similar situations and trying to solve similar problems than they are from, say, somebody that is in the secretariat and might not be so deep. And I think, and that's that bit for you, right? Like, what actually is probably more critical is not just being able to say, I don't know, but being able to say, hey, that I know this person over here, right, had a similar thing. Let's go talk to them, right, and make that connection.
Yeah, and I think, you know, with Nisha Thompson from School of Data, we did this session when I was still at School of Data, focused on network mapping. I use that every day. I teach people that skill every day, and I already had some understanding around it, but I use it to say, who locally has this skill that you can partner with? It should never come, like, and that's when the peer-to-peer setup of, and this is what we're going to be doing in Senegal with UNOCHA and the Humanitarian Data Center, is we have shepherded a list of like local talent, local folks who will come and work with the local humanitarians, including the ICRC and the Red Cross, the Senegal Red Cross. And so this idea of, like, if you have somebody to call locally, it should never be me. Like, it should always be somebody who has that local skill.
Yeah, and I think the thing too is also getting people to open up and realize the value of being a peer-to-peer resource in terms of, you know, what it does for them. In terms of being able to, you know, build their own skills, share their own stuff, and further their own knowledge. Also great with confidence building. But one thing I wanted to get to, also just because, Heather, you've had some really great experiences with a bunch of different organizations that have led you to this point of being with IFRC. I know you've got some background in being in the humanitarian space, but I was just wondering if there was specific things within the humanitarian space that you've learned that's sort of critical and unique, that's different from, say, you know, advocacy organizations or transparency organizations or things like that.
I think different and unique. So for me, because my data literacy work is so intrinsically tied to our principles as humanitarians and so intrinsically tied to data protection and the principles around how do we protect first. So privacy by design is a big part of it, and ICRC is certainly leading the way in that. They have a handbook coming out really shortly on data protection and how do we work within it. So by marrying data protection as part of data literacy and working very closely specifically with the health department, this has been really critical for building out information products, learning materials, simulations, planning. All this stuff is coming forward. I'm testing it out, and so I'll publish it eventually. But the practice of being a humanitarian and how we talk about data is really, the data socialization becomes even stricter, right? And so I think this is what we have in common with the human rights activists and the people who work on digital security or technical security like EFF. You know, we have it in common, but the socialization of no, I won't share information, or no, I can't share information is right the first conversation you have. So when I say data socialization is the bigger part of it, you can't even get to the data pipeline without all that whole preamble. You just cannot get there. And so that's been a good lesson in terms of trying to build data literacy. And so just owning the fact that we need to focus on data protection first and the tactics from data protection, and then we can work on data literacy. That's been a little bit different from the other experiences I had with different groups. So with Ushahidi, it was let's share data and let's share it and let's community build. And I think that was super important. I use community building every day that I learned at Ushahidi. At Humanitarian with Street Map, it was around creating different kind of maps and creating techniques and tools around that. School of Data was a wider mix, and they certainly focused on the technology and the data leaders, which was helpful. But the industry itself and the focus of how we work in the humanitarian space, I'm not alone in this kind of data literacy journey. And in fact, Data Pop Alliance, they're doing a workshop right now in Nairobi, purely focused on data literacy for humanitarians. The workshop that I'm going to be doing with the Humanitarian Data Center in Senegal, that's specifically focused on how do we teach within humanitarians. So we're taking some of the ideas of curriculum, but we changed it quite a bit to be able to serve our audience, which is important, right? And remixable content helps us with that. The other groups, I think some of the stuff that Rahul is doing, and I know you interviewed him, and Catherine, the Stanford work that they're going to be doing in digital impact. I think that the skills from the digital impact.io with that Lucy Bernholtz is doing, that's helpful for us. But again, we have to remix it for our specific work around protection and around health and those different components.
Well, that's interesting, because I think like one of the piece that we are it's like, you know, we're seeing shifts in the culture and shifts in understanding just overall in terms of what happens when you store a whole bunch of data together, and how that becomes sort of a honey pot and a draw, and there are, you know, once you pool a bunch of data together, people want to get at it because that somehow that data becomes valuable. This piece around, it's funny because I think, you know, of course, in the humanitarian space where you have you know, you are trying to do the opposite of harm, right? Or try to do stuff beyond harm. You know, and I'll have to rephrase this, but it's that piece of like, you're on the front line and the sort of like protection bit, right? And it's curious. I mean, it's interesting because I think the rest of the culture is starting to get their heads around it, and starting to get there. And is one of those things where we do have to, anyone that's working on data has to be cognizant of the fact that once you start storing a bunch of data, you are potentially putting a lot of people at risk, and it doesn't matter what you are collecting it for. And so that, you know, I think it's just a really cool and right on example.
The example around data storage and data sharing and data training, we really just had we've been doing a lot of work around that. I think the Responsible Data Forum and Oxfam's, how they've been teaching responsible data has been fantastic, because we're taking some of the concepts, but we're also kind of shifting it for what our organization needs. And frankly, you know, I started out working in open data as a volunteer. And so when I call it data socialization and privacy by design, everyone's going to have to start working that way with the global data protection regulations coming into force. And you know what, this is a good thing, right? But it's going to be hard, because some people who are not preparing their processes or not preparing their training for that kind of methodology will have to catch up. And you know, I'm super thankful for the sense of fear, you know, of we serve the most vulnerable, right? And we work with our local communities. Again, we have millions of volunteers in national societies around the world. We work with the most vulnerable in some of the hardest times of their lives. And those volunteers are sharing data and collecting data and using it. So getting down to how do we get to those volunteers, a lot of the kind of activities have already been embedded into certain programs, which is really core. So just if I was doing spot checks on the various programs, they've already embedded data protection. And so I'm like, can we add another layer inside these modules around data literacy? How can I support the existing talent there? And that's been a really good lesson. And that's why I've been working with health and data protection, because it's been the most need, and certainly a lot of opportunity to kind of use that as a teaching engine for other activities.
That's great. And so speaking of the sort of culture at large, one of the things I'm curious about in terms of the work, as we have seen the sort of rise of these concepts of like post-fact, fake news, data-driven confusion circulating more and more, I'm wondering how that has impacted you and your work. Have you how is it impacting the IFRC, and have you changed anything as a result of that?
Well, I think, you know, we have information managers around the world, and the national societies have information managers, and all of these people, every leader understands that you need to verify information, right? And it's a big part of our work. The growing, can I call it, circus around the world right now in terms of how how information gets used or misused. You know, I think there's some super smart people who have well-versed in terms of how do we do humanitarian action in those kind of spaces. You can read some of the stuff that Hugo Slim from ICRC has written around how do we manage information, and how do we protect how do we follow international humanitarian law? And he's written some books around that. as humanitarians, I can give you an example of how this relates in two ways. One, I think in general, people just trust the data because they need to know how it's made, where it's taken, and how they verify it. So being involved in the conversation and making it part of making sure that people have it as part of their workflow, that we kind of have a risk management assessment or risk matrix. And I've reviewed some of the ones that people have already been doing. And it's really exciting to think about how they add that into the components of their planning. People corrupt data, humans corrupt, and data corrupts humans. This has always been the case, right? So being aware of it, I think the tension around data and accuracy is up, but as humanitarians, there's always been issues with rumor control, right? And rumors and verifying things, and that happens in an emergency state. Our folks in the health group regarding the Ebola response, they worked and trained volunteers quite extensively around rumor control. And it wasn't just social media, it was more what's happening in the communities. And you have to remember that some of these areas, social media is not even in people's purview. It's about phones, it's about SMSs, it's about text messaging. And so how do you manage rumor control in that? So during the Ebola response, there was a lot of lessons and lesson plans, and some super smart healthcare workers work with local communities to kind of manage that. So whether it be about, safe burial, whether it be about, what causes Ebola and the causes in the work, I think this has been important. The ICR, the Federation has some research that just got published last week around how we worked in that space. We have a group called response and rumor control. We have a group that focuses on community engagement and accountability, and they've added it into the full training around how do we talk about rumors. There's a larger network called it's called CDAG, which is the communication with disaster affected communities, and they just did a webinar on rumor control. So when it comes to fake news or fake information, certainly it's something that's always been part of our programmatic activities, but is it going up or going down? I don't know, because I don't have the data on that. But what I can tell you is that certainly it's part of people's focus on critical skills and verification. That's part of following our principles and doing the right thing.
Great, yeah, and those are great examples. I do think it's that whole thing of it is sort of that age-old dilemma in terms of like, how do you counter rumor with fact, right? Mm-hmm. How are you effectively getting facts out there that are believable, mm-hmm. But then also being able to counter misinformation that's leading to greater harm within communities, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the bit too, where having those people that are trained on the ground to be able to do that mm-hmm. Rumor control stuff is really critical. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Heather, in terms of thinking about our theme of data as a team sport, and thinking a little bit about the ecosystem that it takes for people to get to be data literate. Curious in terms of where do you see gaps? Like what's sort of missing in the data literacy ecosystem for the work that you're doing?
So when I was at School of Data, I ran a workshop as part of the Crisis Mappers Conference on using some of the School of Data techniques with the humanitarians. And so it was an ad hoc workshop that Michael and I did together. And, it was this point where I'm like, we need to teach it a little bit differently with humanitarians just because of the activity. I think that there will always be a sector by sector or individual or local country version of it. But if you were to ask me the gaps, I think one of the biggest ones is around shared curriculum. I've been blogging some of the kind of session plans that we've been doing on the IFRC blog. We have a data blog. So blogging those kind of tactics, it's kind of my dream that we have kind of a shared curriculum for it. And I will never be able to teach, for example, like you do, Dirk. I think your user-centered design work and how you make it interactive, it's not about putting people out of work. It's more about here's some tactics I learned on how to do this within a community, and here's some lesson plans that I've created. Go forth and remix it, and then check it back. So I've been talking, and we're creating a data playbook here of these kind of session plans within the Federation. But I think there's an opportunity for a larger set, right? So here's some tactics on how to socialize and achieve buy-in to understand data protection. This is something I'm working on. But I think that these pieces can be put into a larger corpus. And so I draw on anybody else who's working on data literacy. I draw on it and I share it, and I really use the work that other people are doing to kind of help inside. If somebody's doing a piece of work, I don't focus on that. I focus on it and redirect. So for example, the work that Raul and Catherine are doing with Stanford, I think there's a piece there that if I know what they're doing in terms of their roadmap, I'll go focus on something else and then tell everyone to go to that. So that's a practice around kind of sharing curriculum. The Humanitarian Data Center is opening up in The Hague, and they have data labs around the world. So for the humanitarian space, we're talking about how do we kind of share that curriculum and what are the kind of core pieces, which is what the workshop I'm doing in Senegal is. We're co-designing a curriculum, and then we're going to just publish the whole thing. So that's important about using the kind of open principles to be able to go forward. And I think the digital impact IO stuff, the stuff that Stanford's doing with PACS, with the Center for Philanthropy and Civil Society, they're looking at kind of with the Data World Tour, they're looking at a shared curriculum piece. What are the kind of help build data literacy? And again, they're focused a little bit around the GDPR, like the data protection regulations coming out. So this kind of shared curriculum, I think there's a train coming. It's just a matter of like, are all the key actors interested in being involved in something like that? And frankly, maybe there's pieces where we don't share, and that's okay, but I think that's one gap. The second gap is that I think that there's still a huge focus on the tools and let's all be data scientists, rather than can we just be data ready? And you know, honestly, my biggest focus has been on socialization and just making it an open conversation in-house. And, you know, there's all kinds of articles, and John O'Bacon just wrote an article a couple weeks ago around inner sourcing, right? And I think there's some really brilliant minds about using open source principles for internal collaboration. And I think if we can stop focusing on the tools and stop trying to make just for data scientists need hundreds of thousands of points of data to be able to kind of get to that big data place, right? They can also do the really small data stuff, which is brilliant. And I think that ICRC has a data scientist, and she's really brilliant. I think that we do need data scientists, but I think what we need, and the reason that IFRC hired me, is that I'm interested in community building and education. And they saw that there was a gap before you get ready to it. So I'm not a chief data officer. I have no intention of being a chief data officer. Do we need one? Probably, right? Do we have data protection officers? Could we have more of those, like kind of the supporting roles to make a good data ecosystem in a large institution? Yeah, I wrote a plan for 5 years, like with all the different roles and job descriptions. I keep adding new ones. So this focus on tools versus focusing on how do you kind of help the organization be ready. The American Red Cross and the Netherlands Red Cross are doing some other tactics around data readiness, and kind of thinking through how do we do measurement and how do we focus on it. But until the data world itself and the educators around data literacy stop focusing on let's all be data scientists or we all need to code, if they don't focus on bringing people in the conversation, they'll never be able to do it. And so internally, this focus on how we use data and how we use technology versus how people change, what are their skill sets, what's the human behavior, what's their comfort with fear? What's their fear of using data? What's behind that? You know, what's the digital access for that? Like, assuming that everyone can have Tableau around the world. I mean, Tableau is amazing, but you know what they have? Excel, right? And so let's focus on what we have and focus on the skills inside. And I think one of the biggest things about so that shared curriculum and the focus on tools and data science, I think we need those folks, but I think what we really need is we need people and individuals from different groups who are the unusual suspects to be able to kind of understand and be supported, but also feel like they can learn too, and that they have a gift to contribute.
Yeah.
Long answer, but important.
No, good. And I love that. I love those points. And I think, well, I think, you know, one of the things in terms of, you know, giving people that understanding of, you know, should I be a data scientist? You know, one of the things, it was Alex Dunn from the Engine Room at one point had said, you know, everything today is a data project, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things in terms of the data literacy and that bit that you're saying in terms of data, being data ready, mm-hmm. Is actually understanding that, right? And then also understanding that there is a data literacy ecosystem, where there's an ecosystem mm-hmm. that exists around the data. Mm-hmm. And people should not be thinking that I've got to be a whiz, I've got to be a data scientist in order to do this. They just need to understand all the different roles that need to happen around that data. And they have that very critical role of probably asking the question or immediately having the problem that they are trying to get data to solve.
Right.
And then it's the bit of like, well, what else is needed around that? And I think that's the place where we are right now, right? We just need, we have to educate people in terms of understanding, demystifying, right, that data.
Hi, it just cut out.
Did I?
It's all right. You're back.
I'm actually, you've been cutting out a little bit, but not in a bad way. I think there's just a little bit of bandwidth, but there's nothing that's been impacting the audio.
Okay.
So which is my thing. Cool. So just before we wrap, one thing I'm curious about, you've mentioned a couple of really great resources so far in this chat, but are there any, actually, oh my God, Heather, you've given me some great inspiration. Weapons of Math Destruction was something
that book, yeah.
Yeah, it was such a great book. In terms of, oh my God, yeah, I love that book. And we'll probably just plug that just for the sake of plugging it. But are there any other readings, resources, things like that that have been inspiring you lately?
Right. So I come from a technology background, and I try really hard to kind of check that privilege, right? To check the fact that I understand like what an SQL database is. I may not be the person using it. I think this concept around how we collaborate and how like data literacy will happen with collaboration. It won't just be one person, it'll be many people's skills. And this is where Scrum theory comes into place, or Agile software development. So my colleagues at the British Red Cross, Andrew Bray, like, he's really focused on like how can we use kind of Scrum theory for data literacy, right, and for team building. And so that's been a really really exciting, because that's some of the background I do. And so one of our successes has been, in terms of sprints and scrums, these techniques, but thinking about them not in terms of the technology, but thinking of them in terms of the human behavior and the activities and the projects we do. Having a mixed team of non-technical people and people with different skill sets actually makes your data literacy work better, because you get the critical thinking, but you also get the hands-on. And so that's been really, we have a wealth of skills in-house, so that helps us. So Scrum, books on Scrum, books on Sprint. Jake Knapp has a really good book on like the 5-day sprint. That's really important. The Open Organization from Jim Whitehurst, I believe, from Red Hat. The Open Organization has been really important. Socializing internally. The article I send the most is Panthea Lee from Reboots, which basically talks about data for reporting or data for programming. That speaks to managers, that speaks to ops people in the field, that speaks to tech people. Everyone gets that, because we're focused on indicators and the sustainable development goals and our internal metrics or whatever. That speaks to people so broadly in terms of data literacy that it's been one of my biggest things that I share. I share stuff from School of Data, GovLab, Oxfam, Datapop, ICRC, FabWriter, and of course stuff from the Humanitarian Data Center. In my blog, I curate all the best resources and I send it out. We also have a number of mailing lists where we're sharing all the best articles, which is important. So we have a literacy training and activities happen every hour for me. Like, it's always, what am I reading and doing that? But I would say the sprint books, the Open Organization, John L. Bacon's article on InnoSource, I've started to share that around quite recently, if it used to say the most important one. But some of the stuff from World Economic Forum has been helpful too. And we have a innovation team that does futures and foresight. And how do we prepare people to think, especially humanitarians, to think for the future and plan for the future? And so some of the stuff from WEF has been really important in terms of what is digital literacy, what is the digital divide, what are organizations and companies and partners, and how can we get there? So I think that's been really exciting, because that speaks a lot to kind of the strategic planners. Mozilla's web literacy, I've been sending that around. That speaks to other folks. And so actually our IT team has something they call the ICT health checker across the world in terms of technology. So those two kind of methodologies has been shared. The last one, because I know I'm being a long speaker, is the stuff from DataKind and University of Chicago on organizational readiness and data readiness. Those have been instrumental. In fact, Netherlands Red Cross has put it in their report in terms of planning for data readiness. The American Red Cross, same thing, looking at it. We're looking at it and saying, how can we test out this in terms of, is an organization ready? And so that's been created originally by DataKind UK, and then was remixed by University of Chicago, DataKind in the US. And so Jake Porraway's stuff, super golden. I think that's it for kind of data literacy type focused things, but I think that we need I hope my point has been proven that data literacy is not necessarily something that's just about tools and technology. It's really about that outer organizational development, and thinking about organizational change will actually help your data literacy grow better.
That's good. Your own work, is there anything that I can get you to plug, including Text on Text, which is one of my favorite blogs out there?
You're so kind. So we're working on a data playbook, which is the session design. So the data blog for IFRC is where we're starting to put all those different stories in different sessions. So to me, there's brilliant stuff happening at 510 Global. 510 Global is a startup initiative as part of the Netherlands Red Cross, the American Red Cross GIS team. So when I say my work, it's really about all this other work and kind of surfacing it. There's somebody in the Philippines Red Cross who created a Data Science 101 manual, and he just handed it to me. He's like, hey, Heather, can this help other national societies? I'm like, wow. So the beauty of this global network of the Federation is that there's so much talent out there, and if we could just share those resources, that's what the whole purpose of the data playbook is.
Cool, that's great. And so just to say, links to all those resources will be available on the webpage that contains the notes that go along with this episode. And to wrap us up, to say, this concludes this online conversation for Data as a Team Sport. It's been great to get to do this deep dive on data literacy within humanitarian spaces, but also thinking more in terms of big institutions and all that. And also just like, I think my big takeaway from this conversation is, again, you've got to focus on people and not tools. But as part of that, it's within the ecosystem, giving people that understanding of all the different people that go on, that are needed, to all the different people and all the different brains and all the different expertise that is needed for a successful data project. Yeah. So just want to say big thank you to you, Heather, for doing this. Also want to say a big thanks to Caitlin Rogers and the School of Data team for helping to make this happen. Please stay tuned to the School of Data website for more information and the next Data as a Team Sport conversation. As I said, you can find notes from these conversations along with the links to the video recordings of the Hangout on the School of Data website at schoolofdata.org. Also, the podcast series, you can find it on the School of Data website. We're also on SoundCloud, the iTunes Store, and Stitcher. Just search for Data as a Team Sport. Our latest episode that is currently making circulation is the one featuring Eva Constanteris and Natalie Mazzotte talking about data-driven journalism. But our next one, which will be released, features Sam Leon and Milena Marin. Sam Leon from Global Witness, Milena Marin from Amnesty, talking about advocacy organizations. Want to end this with a big thank you to anyone that is listening or watching this. We hope this has benefited and informed your own data literacy efforts.